The wind howled through the narrow streets of Ashenvale, a quaint town perpetually shrouded in mist and whispers of its haunted history. The rain fell in sheets, transforming cobblestones into slick, glistening mirrors that distorted the faint glow of the gas lamps lining the empty roads. Claire Winters tugged her coat tighter around her as she hurried home, her thoughts clouded by the familiar unease that always seemed to settle in her chest when night fell. The sound came suddenly, faint and distant, a whisper just at the edge of hearing. Claire froze mid-step, her breath puffing into the cold night air. She turned her head slowly, scanning the darkness behind her, but the street remained empty. She shook her head, blaming the wind, and started walking again. "Help me," the voice pleaded, louder this time. Claire stopped again, her heart pounding. It was a child's voice, soft and trembling, as if carried on the wind itself. She turned toward the sound, her eyes locking onto a looming silhouette at the end of the street. There it stood, the old Victorian house, its blackened facade blending into the stormy night. For years, it had been a place of whispered tales and wild rumors, a house cursed by the misfortunes of its previous inhabitants. It seemed to beckon her now, the voice emanating from its shadowy depths. Against her better judgment, Claire took a hesitant step forward, then another. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if unseen hands were pulling her closer to the house. The gate creaked as she pushed it open, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the storm. She reached the front porch, her fingers trembling as she ran them along the rotting wood of the doorframe. The voice had stopped, but the oppressive silence that replaced it was somehow worse. A chill ran down her spine as she leaned in, pressing her ear against the door. And then it spoke again, this time a whisper so close it could have been right behind her. "Find me." The door swung open with a groan, revealing a yawning darkness that seemed to stretch forever. Claire's heart thudded in her chest as she peered inside. She should have run, should have called someone, anyone, but her feet betrayed her, carrying her over the threshold and into the belly of the house. The air inside was stale and thick, carrying the faint scent of mildew and something older, more ancient. Claire's shoes crunched against a layer of dust as she stepped cautiously into the foyer. The room was as silent as a tomb, save for the faint dripping of water somewhere deep within the house. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing decaying furniture, cloaked in white sheets. The light flickered as it passed over a grand staircase, its banister warped and cracked with age. Her unease grew with every step she took, the oppressive silence pressing down on her like a heavy weight. "Claire." The voice was a breath against her ear, so close she stumbled back in shock. Her flashlight swung wildly, the beam bouncing off the peeling wallpaper and the jagged edges of a shattered mirror hanging askew on the wall. The reflection that greeted her was distorted, her own face twisted as if the mirror were trying to trap her within. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice shaky. No answer came, only the faint hum of something unseen, something alive. Drawn by a strange compulsion, Claire ascended the staircase, her feet moving as if guided by invisible hands. The upper floor was a labyrinth of shadowy hallways, each one stretching into a darkness that seemed to breathe. She stopped at a door at the end of the hall, her hand hovering over the rusted knob. It felt wrong, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do. The door creaked open, revealing a child's bedroom frozen in time. Toys lay scattered on the floor, their once vibrant colors dulled by decades of neglect. A small bed sat against the far wall, its faded quilt covered in dust. On the dresser was a journal, its leather cover cracked and worn. Claire's fingers brushed against the journal as she picked it up, a shock of cold running through her hand. She flipped it open, her breath catching as she read the first entry. They've trapped me. I can't leave. Please, if you find this, help me." The words were written in a shaky hand, the ink smeared as if the writer had been crying. Page after page, the entries grew more frantic, each one a desperate plea for escape. A name appeared again and again, scrawled across the margins. Alyssa. The whispers returned, surrounding her, overlapping and blending into a chilling cacophony of voices. Claire's heart raced as the temperature in the room plummeted, her breath visible in the icy air. The journal fell from her hands, landing with a muffled thud. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her, the sound reverberating through the room like a gunshot. Claire spun around, her flashlight flickering as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Find me," they demanded. Her fear was a tangible thing now, clawing at her throat as she struggled to make sense of what was happening. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls and burrowing into her mind. And then, just as abruptly as they had begun, the voices fell silent. The room was still once more, the suffocating quiet leaving Claire trembling. She knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The sunlight barely pierced the heavy curtains of Claire's small apartment, where she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the journal. She hadn't slept since the night at the Victorian house. The words written by the mysterious Alyssa seemed to haunt her, echoing in her mind with every tick of the clock. On the table, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Mia, her childhood best friend, confirming their long-awaited reunion. Claire's fingers hovered over the screen. A part of her hesitated to involve Mia, but she needed someone to help her untangle the mystery before it consumed her completely. She responded with a quick message: "Let's meet at the cafe around noon." By the time Claire arrived at the cafe, the sky had turned gray, the clouds heavy with the promise of rain. She stepped inside, the warmth and chatter of the room momentarily easing her nerves. She spotted Mia at a corner table, her auburn hair a vibrant contrast to the muted atmosphere. "Claire!" Mia's face lit up, her arms open for a hug. But as Claire sat down, Mia's smile faltered. "You look tired. Are you okay?" Claire hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I've been dealing with something strange, and honestly, I don't know what to make of it." As Claire recounted her experience at the house, the whispers, the journal, the voice calling her name, Mia's expression shifted from concern to disbelief, and then to something Claire hadn't expected: recognition. "I know that house," Mia said, her voice barely audible. "I used to walk past it on my way to the school. I always felt like it was watching me." Claire blinked. "Watching you?" Mia nodded, her hands gripping her mug. "It's hard to explain, but I had dreams about it. And about someone inside. A girl." "Alyssa?" Claire asked, her heart pounding. Mia's eyes widened. "Yes, that's the name. Claire, this can't be a coincidence." Before Claire could respond, her phone vibrated on the table. It was a text from Mia's number. "Help me, I'm trapped." Her blood turned cold. She showed the message to Mia, whose face went pale. "That's impossible. I didn't send that," Mia whispered. A prickling sensation crawled up Claire's spine. She looked around the cafe, her gaze falling on the window. Beyond the glass, a shadow flickered at the edge of the parking lot, faint, but unmistakably human. "Mia, we need to go," Claire said, her voice trembling. The two hurried outside, the chill of the overcast afternoon wrapping around them. But when Claire looked back toward the parking lot, the shadow was gone. The storm began that evening, a steady downpour drumming against Claire's windows. She sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, the journal open before her and her laptop glowing faintly beside it. The name Alyssa had led her to an old archive of local records, where she found a single article about a missing girl. Alyssa Carter, age 10, last seen in Ashenvale, November 1901. The article mentioned the Victorian house. Alyssa had lived there with her family before she vanished. No evidence of foul play had ever been found, but rumors suggested that the house was touched by something otherworldly. Claire's phone rang, breaking her concentration. It was Mia, but when she answered, there was no greeting, just static, crackling and hissing in her ear. Then came the voice, distorted and distant. "Find her. She's waiting." "Mia, is that you?" Claire's voice trembled. The line went dead. She tried calling back, but the call went straight to voicemail. Her chest tightened with panic. Mia was in danger. She could feel it as surely as the rain that beat against the window. Grabbing her coat, Claire drove back to the Victorian house, the night pressing against her car like a living thing. The house loomed before her, its dark windows like unblinking eyes. Claire hesitated at the gate, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. Every fiber of her being told her to turn back, but Mia's face flashed in her mind. If Alyssa's spirit was tied to the house, then maybe Mia had been drawn into its web too. Inside, the air was colder than before, the walls groaning softly as if in protest of her presence. Claire climbed the staircase again, her footsteps muffled by the thick dust. The hallway seemed longer this time, stretching into a darkness that pulsed like a heartbeat. The door to the child's bedroom was ajar. Claire pushed it open, the flashlight beam trembling in her hand. The journal lay on the bed where she had left it, but something was different. The walls, once faded and peeling, were now covered in scribbles. Desperate messages scrawled in a child's hand. "Help me. She's coming. Don't leave me." The whispers returned, louder now, swelling into a symphony of overlapping voices. Claire's knees buckled as a pressure built in her head, her vision blurring. "Stop!" she cried, clutching the journal to her chest. The whispers ceased abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake, and then she saw it. A faint figure standing in the corner of the room. A girl, her features shrouded in shadow, her form flickering like a broken film reel. "Alyssa?" Claire whispered. The figure didn't move, but raised a trembling hand, pointing to the floor. Claire followed the gesture, her flashlight revealing a loose floorboard. With shaking hands, she pried it up, revealing a small, dusty box inside. Inside the box was a locket, its surface tarnished but still gleaming faintly. As Claire touched it, a wave of warmth and sorrow washed over her. A cascade of memories that weren't her own. Laughter, fear, and finally a lingering despair that had rooted itself in the house for over a century. The figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared, but the house seemed to exhale, its oppressive weight lifting slightly. Claire clutched the locket tightly. She knew now what she had to do, but time was running out. Mia's life depended on it. The storm intensified as Claire stepped out of the house, clutching the locket in one hand and the journal in the other. Lightning illuminated the skeletal trees surrounding the property, their shadows clawing at the ground like desperate hands. The wind howled, carrying with it faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. She glanced at her phone. Still no word from Mia. Her chest tightened as she climbed into her car, the locket growing unnaturally warm in her grasp. It was a subtle heat, not painful but insistent, as though it were alive, guiding her. Claire drove with trembling hands, the road ahead barely visible. Through the rain-smeared windshield, the town was eerily silent, its usual hum of life replaced by an oppressive quiet. The locket pulsed softly, a rhythmic vibration that matched the whispers in her ears. She didn't question its direction as she left the main road and turned onto an overgrown path leading to the old cemetery. The gate stood open, swaying slightly in the wind. Beyond it, rows of crumbling headstones jutted from the earth like broken teeth. Her flashlight revealed the ground to be soaked and uneven, black mud squelching beneath her boots. She moved quickly, the locket tugging her forward like a compass. Near the far end of the cemetery, her flashlight beam caught a figure, a faint silhouette standing among the graves. Claire's heart raced, her breath catching as she approached. "Mia?" she called out. The figure turned. It wasn't Mia. The girl from the house stood there, her outline faint and wavering, as though she were made of mist. Her face was clearer now. Round cheeks, wide, hollow eyes, and a sadness so profound it radiated like a chill. Alyssa raised her hand, pointing to a headstone partially hidden by ivy. Claire knelt, brushing the ivy away to reveal the inscription, Alyssa Carter, 1891 to 1901. Her throat tightened as she traced the carved letters. The locket grew hotter, its pulsing almost frantic now. She looked up at Alyssa, who watched her with an intensity that felt ancient and knowing. "What do you need me to do?" Claire whispered. The locket snapped open in her hand, revealing a tiny photograph of Alyssa and an inscription etched inside the lid. "Come home." The realization hit Claire like a wave. Alyssa wasn't trapped in the house or the cemetery. She was tethered to her family's story, fractured and incomplete. She needed to be remembered, her voice carried forward, so she could finally rest. Alyssa reached out, her spectral hand brushing the locket. Claire felt a surge of warmth, and for a brief moment, the storm around her seemed to fade. The whispers softened, replaced by a faint melody, a lullaby, haunting, yet beautiful, echoing through the trees. But then the ground beneath her feet trembled. A shadow moved at the edge of the cemetery, vast and amorphous, growing as it consumed the moonlight. It wasn't human, but a shape born of darkness, its presence oppressive and suffocating. The air turned icy as the shadow crept closer, its outline shifting and writhing like smoke. "No," Claire murmured, her voice trembling. "You can't have her." The shadow paused, its tendrils recoiling slightly, as if testing her resolve. Claire stood her ground, clutching the locket tightly. The warmth spread through her, pushing back against the cold. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice firmer now. "She's not yours to keep." Alyssa's figure began to fade, her eyes locked onto Claire's. The locket grew lighter in her hand, the pulsing slowing to a steady rhythm. The lullaby swelled, drowning out the whispers until the shadow recoiled fully, retreating into the darkness. The cemetery fell silent. The storm eased, the rain dwindling to a soft drizzle. Claire sank to her knees, exhausted but resolute. The locket was cool now, its glow faint but peaceful. She placed it gently on Alyssa's grave, her heart heavy with both grief and relief. "Rest now," she whispered. As the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, Claire turned to leave. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight that had hung over her for days finally lifted. She glanced back one last time. Alyssa's grave stood quiet, the ivy swaying gently in the breeze. But Claire felt a presence still, a quiet gratitude that warmed her as she walked away. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Mia. "I don't know what happened," Mia said, her voice shaky but clear. "I woke up in my car, just outside town. Are you okay?" Claire smiled faintly, tears stinging her eyes. "Yeah, I think we're both okay now." As she drove away from the cemetery, the whispers faded completely, leaving only the faint memory of a girl's voice carried on the wind. "Thank you."